And while Israel is dealing with real and physical threats on the ground, many accusations and condemnations of Israel amidst praises sung for terror group Hamas coming in from abroad. Chana Rifkin reporting.
Israel's right to defend itself from indiscriminate rocket fire. Upheld by several in the international community, leaders in Europe, the UK, and the US, among those calling on Hamas and other Palestinian terror groups to cease their terrorism, while calling on all sides to show restraint and begin reducing tensions.
We stand by Israel's right to defend itself. We also stand by the principle that Palestinians deserve the right to live in safety and security. I'm not here to adjudicate military operations, to say what is proportional precisely, what is not. But the United States certainly stands by the principle that civilians should not, that any loss of civilian life is deeply lamentable, whether that is a Palestinian life or an Israeli life. That is why we've continued to call on calm, call for calm, continued to call on all sides to de-escalate and to exercise restraint in their actions. Yes, Barbara.
While many condemn the loss of any civilian life and called for restraint, however, there are many more denying Israel's right to self-defense, while seemingly supporting Hamas rocket fire and the ongoing riots in Israel. Controversial Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, for one, accusing Israel of terrorism for its airstrikes in Gaza, because Gaza doesn't have an Iron Dome defense system. She fails to even mention Hamas rocket fire against Israel. Likewise, crowds of protesters taking to the streets of New York, London, and elsewhere, particularly in the Arab world, alleging Israel's targeting of children. And so-called squad member, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, calling out the White House for refusing to condemn such killings, but again ignoring Palestinian terror completely. And this despite State Department spokesperson Ned Price expressly lamenting all civilian casualties.
The loss of life of innocent Palestinians, of innocent Israelis, is something we deeply regret, and is precisely why we are doing everything we can. We are doing everything we can in coordination with our international partners to put an end to a cycle of escalation and a cycle of violence.
So what is the overall consensus from the international community, and how will it affect the situation on the ground? With me to discuss, Newsweek columnist and editor of Historycentral.com, Marc Schulman, and then author and executive director of Standwithus Israel, Michael Dickson. Thank you both again for being with us today. Now, Marc, starting with you. You wrote a piece about American Democrats' responses overnight. What do you make of this supposed shift in policy in the Democratic Party?
I don't think it's a shift in policy in the Democratic Party. I think we have a group of people, what's described as the squad, but the very much quote unquote progressives who A, don't know very much, are ignorant, and B, have built in or accepted this, this view. There's this view amongst the progressives these days that it's not important who's right. Whoever's weakest is the right party. Something stuck on me. I saw this morning, Trevor North gave a monologue last night in the Daily Show about Israel-Palestine. Without going through the whole monologue, the final part of it is, I don't really care about history. Who can tell who's right or wrong? But who's stronger? So whoever's stronger must be the wrong party. People who are stronger should just ignore the weak party. We should totally ignore the attacks from Hamas because they can't hurt us. Well, guess what? They certainly can hurt us. We can't ignore it. And to go back to your first question, I think this time we ignore the international community completely. We do whatever we need to do, whatever we have to do. Keeping in mind, look, ignoring the international community is not to do war crimes and not to do things that we shouldn't be doing. And we must continue to do what we have been doing, which is limit civilian casualties to the extent possible. Look at it a different way. I mean, my blood boiled when I saw the New York Times headline this morning that said 20 Palestinians in Gaza killed and 3 Israelis killed because of increased violence or whatever. It should really say only 20 killed, considering the fact that almost all of them were members of Hamas, and considering the fact that we had 500 airstrikes, maybe even more, and only 20 people were killed. That makes it very clear who's being very, very careful to make sure that civilians don't get killed. I mean, we look at World War II or any other war in history, and people didn't care the slightest about civilian casualties. They were part of the game, so to speak. I mean, the United States bombed Japan, bombed Germany. They jumped civilian targets in both those cities as part of the war effort, the full war effort. Hamas has taken the people of Gaza into a war against us. We need to wage that war to the point where we decide we've reached some version of a victory, whatever that means. That's a different discussion. We must be careful. We must kill as few civilians as possible. We must follow the rules of war as much as we can, but we must achieve our goals, because I'm sorry, those rockets that come flying over at us, they do kill people and they do destroy lives. And I don't want to think about the PTSD it creates to thousands and millions of children who are going to live through these nights and the future nights in the next few weeks. Not to mention those who've been living on the Gaza Strip for the last years.
So Michael, I want to bring you in. What have you noticed, especially as executive director of Stand With Us? It's again, largely suspected that the violence is upending the Biden White House's Middle East policy as well. Is there any truth to this?
I think that we need to make sure that our message is clear about why this is happening now and why we have people who have been murdered and injured and why we've had millions of Israelis huddled in their bomb shelters, including people like me and my family. And that's because Hamas has decided to escalate this campaign. Hamas targets civilians rather. Hamas targets civilians and Israel targets terrorists. And one of these things is not like the other. And we have to make that very, very clear. There is a reason why this is happening. It's a campaign of terror by an ISIS-like group together with other groups. And I would expect all people of goodwill and world leaders to condemn it as such, as they would in any other country. So it's Hamas who's dictating the violence and the escalation. Israel has to do everything that it can do to safeguard the lives of men, women, and children within its borders. And we need to be telling people that that is the side they should be standing on. And of course, we know, as Mark said, there's a lot of ignorance out there, and our job should be to educate people about the facts of the situation.
Well, so how do you react to Mark's other assertion that we should essentially stop caring what the international community thinks?
Well, I think he's right in that Israel has to first and foremost protect its civilians and do what it needs to do in order to stop the bloodshed. Let's be in no doubt. We saw terrible sights in the sky when rockets were being intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome system. There were booms overhead as people were huddling in the bomb shelters. But let's think for a minute what it would be like if we didn't have that Iron Dome, or if Hamas had worse weapons. They would use them in a heartbeat. They wouldn't hesitate. If they could wipe out the lives of Israelis in their hundreds, thousands, and even millions, they could. And of course, they are funded by the genocidal Islamic Republic of Iran, which wants to do just that. So Israel has to do first and foremost what is right to safeguard the lives of its people of all backgrounds. In Israel, Jews and Arabs have equally died at the hands of Hamas and been injured and are huddling under the threat of bombs and rockets. So that's what Israel has to do first. At the same time, we are able to put out a message to the world about the reasons why this is happening and about who Hamas really is. And people of goodwill should not be standing with a jihadi terrorist organization. And that's something that we expect from our allies and from all people of goodwill.
All right, Michael Dickson of Stand With Us and Marc Schulman of Newsweek and Historycentral.com. Thank you both so much.
Pleasure.